think it's very important to take any conversation about what's gone on in Jisc over the last 3 years back to the Wilson review of Jisc, which came out about nearly 3 years ago now. And although that was organised by the Higher Education Funding Council, it did also take full note of the FE sector and its needs, and had very strong input from the Association of Colleges and BIS and other relevant stakeholders. There are some positive things that the Wilson Review said about Jisc, particularly its world-class international reputation, and also its holistic approach. And what I understood that to mean specifically is that what Jisc provides, it starts right from the electrons and the photons going through the national JANET network and its regional offshoots, building up through the technology stack, through applications, then moving into data, content, policies, and also training and expertise and people and networks of people rather than networks of photons and electrons. And again, we've got a really good sense, I think, today already of the community that the Regional Support Centre in this region helps to foster. So it's that holistic spread. So you have different organisations that just concentrate on learning technology or networking or scholarly publications, research journals, Jisc's the organisation that actually has that holistic spread. So those were two strengths. There were a number of things that the Wilson Review suggested that Jisc, as it was then, particularly around its innovation function, could improve. It had what was perceived as too large a portfolio of projects. So it was let 1,000 flowers bloom, just gave out money quite widely, didn't always track the benefits, and so many of those flowers died, and the ones which did go on to grow strongly just didn't really track that in any way and get the credit for its work. But that was considered too large, so one of the suggestions was moving away from 1,000 flowers to a smaller number of big trees and making sure that we could see the wood for the trees. The application process is opaque, so Jisc used to give out a lot of money through just calls, through open competitions. And on the face of it, that would appear to be a fair, objective process. But the Wilson report was subject to the rules of civil service language, and I don't speak that dialect myself, but I understand that opaque is quite a strong criticism when it comes out to the way that money was being given out. So I think when they looked where the money went, they could see that there was just a very small number of institutions that repeatedly got all of the money, rather than it being spread more widely around the sector, and people didn't feel that was, well, the report says what it says, which that process was opaque. Few projects translated into live services, so there were a lot of quite speculative projects that would end with quite an interesting, often provocative discussion paper or dissemination event, but no further work, no new national shared services that directly came. And Jisc also not to see itself as a research organisation or a research funder. The BIS department was quite clear that it already funds research councils to fund academic research, and it didn't want just to do that, it wanted just to do something complementary, which was around providing services and helping with practitioners rather than with academic research. And so as a result of that, Jisc has been relaunched, it's been rebooted, has a new mission, which is to put HE, FE and the skills sector to help support the use of technology in those three sectors, to put and to keep the UK right at the forefront globally in the world. So it's quite an ambitious mission that Jisc set itself. What I would say to you, if you want to take one thing from this session generally about what Jisc is trying to do, and just the top team, the leadership team, we're working incredibly hard to change Jisc in the direction of the Wilson Review, and it's actually not that easy. the way things are set up were very complicated in the way the staffing arrangements, for example, are working, and changing a culture in that kind of organisation takes time. We haven't got a lot of time. It won't be long before our funding is reviewed again. But what I would say is we're absolutely busting a gut to make these changes, and we've got a great level of support from staff, but it's such a large, complex organisation that it's just hard to turn that big ship around. We're certainly trying. So about just less than 18 months ago, Jisc, rather than being a committee with no staff and a very complicated set of subcontractual arrangements, actually became an organisation with a number of direct employees and a leadership team. I'm not sure how I'm able to. Oh, I didn't want to do that. So let's try and explain how this. Can you still hear me if I walk across like this? We've got, if we carry on my horticultural analogy, we're talking about the 1,000 flowers, but moving to the smaller number of big trees in the forest. So we've got two people who help run the forest. They run the irrigation systems and, you know, the fence and stuff like that, which is Alice as Chief Operating Officer and Mark as Chief Financial Officer. So those are the internal support functions within the Jisc organisation. Obviously Martin Harrow as Chief Executive as the sort of forester-in chief of the whole Jisc forest. But then you've got three production foresters who run the three clusters within the forest. There's the technology cluster, which includes the Janet network and the Edge Your Own service and various other bits of technology. There's Lorraine as the digital resources forest cluster, just collections, the scholarly journals, the collections of online resources that a number of people use. And then there's Robert as the Executive Director for Customer Experience, and his bit of the forest includes, for example, the regional support centres, like the Yorkshire and Humbersides we're organising today's event. And then myself as Chief Innovation Officer, it's actually my job. I run the nursery in the forest, so it's my job to try and grow new trees in any of those three areas, to try and work with some of those people to grow them up. And some of those trees won't grow very well, they won't take, they'll die and they'll wither away. Some of those trees will become sustainable, they'll have real promise to become new Jisc services. And at that point, what I need to do is work with one of those three foresters and actually transplant the tree to their part of the forest, and they keep growing it. So I'm trying to grow some new trees, they're trying to keep the existing trees nicely pruned and in shape, because networks don't run themselves, journal suppliers certainly don't behave themselves, or publishers if you don't keep quite a close eye on them, etc. So they're trying to keep their bits of the forest in shape, hopefully giving the whole thing a nice coherent shape so the trees fit together in a nice joined up way. And they're also receiving some new trees from me where that makes sense, some new Jisc services. And finally, these three production foresters have been asked to do something which foresters are never very good at, and all of us as foresters are never very good at, which is to actually cut down some of the trees now and again. So sometimes services reach the end of their useful life, they're no longer useful, they're no longer relevant, and we're all very bad at stopping things when they've reached the end of their natural life. But it is quite important, if we want to do new things, that we create the capacity to allow us to, by stopping old things which people no longer value, to allow us to do the new things. So I'm trying to grow the new trees, the new Jisc services for the future, and once they're grown, to transfer them into one of those three areas in a way that all fits together nicely, and the forest as a whole has a nice clear shape. Again, this is part of Jisc's new strategy and strategic framework post the Wilson Review, and it's a graphical representation of that holistic spread that the Wilson Review talked about. In the centre we have our customers and the core business of the sectors, the HEFE and skills sectors. It's on the website somewhere as well. I mean, you're very welcome to take a snapshot, but I think you'll find it wasn't on the Jisc website for a while actually after it published, but it is there now. So, and then the enabling technologies around the outside, again that spans this sort of wide area that Jisc covers. Over time, we need to address all of those areas. So, for example, if we do innovation work that's only in open agenda or only in cyber security, that's not very good. We need to sort of spread our money reasonably evenly around the perimeter of the circle in terms of the areas that we look at. Okay, so zooming in on my department, there used to be a Jisc innovation function which used to run all of these calls for funding, which the Wilson Review described as opaque. That no longer exists, and it's been replaced by a new division within Jisc called Digital Futures. It's a new role, Chief Innovation Officer, which is myself. And then some people such as Rachel Bruce and Andy McGregor, who've come in from the previous Jisc Innovations operation, names that you may be familiar with, and others who've come from outside, who are new recruits into the Jisc organisation, such as Martin Hamilton. So I hope we've got a good blend of people who've worked in the Jisc family for a while, and people who've worked within the sectors that Jisc serves. And what I'm saying is that as far as the future of Jisc is concerned, okay, there's a set of services that we run at the moment which people value. We want to keep improving those through a process of continual improvement. So that's keeping the existing trees pruned and in shape. But we also need to grow some new trees. And what my proposition is that there is a new set of trees, a new set of national shared services that people would value. That's just there waiting to be found, waiting to be invented. And rather than going out and asking people to bid for money competitively to try and identify those new trees, I'm suggesting that we'd be better off trying to do take a different approach, which is a more consensus-based approach across the sector, a more cooperative approach. The approach that we're suggesting is Jisc's version of co-design process. So the problem with any shared service is not invented here. People don't use a service, even if they think it's quite good, if they don't feel they have any kind of ownership. So under our version of co-design is quite a widely used word. Engineers use it a lot. You can search for it on Google and Wikipedia. But in Jisc's variant of co-design, what we're trying to do is involve stakeholders, involve yourselves at the earliest possible stage in the creation and then the development of the new service. So you feel that you own it as well, and therefore not invented here won't apply. Got easy said than done, but that's very simply, that's what we're trying to achieve. Why is it Jisc that's trying to do this? Well, other bodies could do it, and we are working with other bodies, but just to recap, it's Jisc that has that holistic spread. So I think Jisc as an organisation is particularly well placed to try and see the bigger picture and put various strands together. But it doesn't mean Jisc has a monopoly, and the whole point of co-design is that we do work very directly and constructively with other partners. So at the moment, we're trying to put together a programme of work with working with stakeholder groups, working with people like yourselves that you feel you've got a degree of ownership, and to assemble that into some kind of pipeline. And again, one of the things we're really trying to focus on, this isn't the best slide, but I haven't managed to get one that's better yet, and somebody can do a better job. But what I'm trying to say is that in the past, different parts of the Jisc family have worked in their own silos and haven't really talked to each other very well. So you've had people working perhaps on some new content, some new subscription materials that you have to log into with a username and password, and those people haven't been talking to some other people who've been working on the new access and identity management systems, which is different ways of typing in usernames and passwords. So we've ended up with some of our services not building on other services that we're using. So what this is trying to say is that we need now, as part of the new Jisc organisation, to join up across our different silos much better than we have done in the past, and make sure that we're building coherently on the foundation. And the foundation literally is the Janet network, and then working our way up through that stack in a coherent way. So that's what that slide's trying to say. It's not great, but I hope that makes a degree of sense. We were given some very specific advice from the Wilson Review about how we spend our innovation money, that we should be focusing on, most of our projects should be low risk. In other words, things which we can see, which we are most likely to turn into new production services. but we're allowed to do a few speculative things. What do I mean by speculative? I don't know, looking, what will VLEs look like in 10 years' time? I mean, we don't know, so something very speculative at that point. That would be the high risk end. So maybe we're allowed to do 2 or 3 of those things. But on the whole, we've been asked to invest our innovation money in things which are most likely to lead within the next few years into new shared services that people will value and use. And what I've been trying to do, I've been at Jisc now for 8 months, and what I've been trying to do is to get around as many parts of the country, a bit internationally as well, but mainly within the UK, and speak at different events and to different sets of people to try and explain what we're doing and to seek new ideas and partners. So I'm very grateful for the invitation today, which fits exactly into that. So let's try and summarise what we're trying to do from this innovation perspective. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep that holistic spread that was defined by our circle in the strategic framework. We're trying to convolve that with a risk distribution and with people's ideas and priorities, and to do it in a coherent way where we're building on different, one thing is built coherently on top of another thing in terms of the new sets of services and the existing sets of services. So that's our pipeline, and we want to feed that into a co-design development cycle, which I'll explain a bit further in a minute, that's the point where we try and grow the trees in the nursery and see whether they've got any traction or whether they become sustainable trees or whether they die and wither away straight away, in which case we move on. So if the trees die, we learn whatever lessons we can. We're honest about it, but we don't try and turn those into production services because we know people won't value them or use them. But in as many cases as possible, we want to develop new Jisc products and services which end up in our Jisc membership catalogue. Now, hands up how many people knew that we had a Jisc catalogue of services? None. One, well, half. Okay, well, we didn't have one till about 6 months ago, so it's quite new, so you've got a good excuse. But now, particularly in higher education, the way that Jisc is funded has changed quite significantly. So in the past, from higher education, all of Jisc's money used to come straight from the funding councils. And sometimes I say that's the tooth fairy. It is your money, it's the sector's money, but people don't really notice. It doesn't go through the universities. Now that's going to change. From September, 80% of Jisc's funding is still coming from the tooth fairy, but 20% is now coming straight from universities as a subscription. Only 20%, but my goodness, that's changed people's focus on what we do and whether we give good value for money. But let me give you an analogy. Stephen Heppel was talking about the recent national student surveys that came out. And when you look at some of the data there, between last year and this year, student contact hours have barely changed. The amount of money that the sector spends, the size of the sector, none of those fundamentals have changed at all. Student satisfaction is about the same this year and last year, but there was one really big change in the numbers between this year and last year, and that was students' perception of value for money. So this year, students have, I think the number of students who felt that what they were getting was good value for money had gone down from something like 90% to about 45%. It had halved. Right at the same time, that although the total bill for higher education is the same, that money is now not coming straight through the government, but £9,000 of that is coming through from the student loans company in the way that the student sees and the way the student thinks it's their money, because they may end up having to pay that back as a loan, depending on how much they earn and all the rest of it. So the fact that this funding no longer comes from the tooth fairy but goes through the student in the way the student thinks it's their money in a tangible sense has completely changed their perception of value for money, of what they're getting from higher education. And in exactly the same way, the fact that 20% of Jisc's funding from HE is about to go through the universities in the way that university budget holders now see in a tangible way has completely changed their focus on what's value for money. Very interesting how that change in funding model, not the total bill, but just the way that the route that the money takes completely changes people's perception. And so we've got to have a conversation with people over the next 3 years, which is essentially, okay, you've always been paying for this, but actually when it used to come from the TFR, you really weren't worried about what we did with the money. You banked the cheque if you were one of the people who got just funding for your projects. And that was really it. But now this money's going through your bank accounts, you're seeing it, you're asking us to justify much more. Well, what are we getting? And so we've put together this catalogue, which for the first time lists in one place all the different services that Jisc provides. And over the next few months, we're going to add to that not just the list, but the actual value. So first of all, for the value for the sector as a whole. If you went out and got your network another way other than for the Janet network, how much more would that cost the sector as a whole? If you went out and bought all your research journals or online learning resources separately with individual purchasing arrangements, how much more would that cost the sector as a whole? So that's one way of generating value, demonstrating value, which is quite good when you're talking to the funding councils or to BIS about FE funding. But we also need to go down into a level of detail for the individual institutions, because for HE, they get individual bills. We've got to say to University College London, if you were getting this sort of dark fibre network to enable your particle physics research and you had to buy that yourselves, how much would that cost you compared with what you're getting at the moment? So on a case-by-case basis. So you're going to see this part of our website evolve to go from just a list of services, which is a good start, to a list of services and their value for the sectors as a whole, for HE, FE and skills as a whole. And then beyond that, to the individual institutions, you'll be able to click on your own institution and see the value that you're getting. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do that within 3 years, because in 3 years' time, Jisc's funding will be reviewed. And, well, we've seen what other organisations have been reviewed recently, for example, the Higher Education Academy, which is just based across the way in York. And they got reviewed, and the review made comments about the value that they were delivering for the sector, and that's led where it's led. And Jisc really wants to try and demonstrate as best it can what the value is to the sector as a whole and also to individuals. So developing new service, first, there's two strands to that. One is making sure our existing services are run as well as possible and people see the value in those. And second, we need to develop a decent set of new services so people can see that Jisc isn't standing still, it's moving forward. And that's specifically my area. The process we're using is co-design. Some of the principles and foundations are explained very well in this booklet. But it is a more agile approach and it is a more cooperative approach. We ran it as a pilot a year ago with 4 partners and ourselves. And it's quite important actually, 5 co-design partners. Old Jisc, when we used to give out money through Jisc calls, Jisc would give the money out, but then it would just play a sort of project assurance role. It would just check that milestones were being met and things like that. Now we're active partners as well in the co-design process. We don't want to monopolise the conversation, but we're actively part of trying to shape these pieces of work in a way that we never were when we used to just dole out the money. So a pilot was run a year ago with Research Libraries UK, Russell Group IT Directors, SCONL, which is the Club of University Librarians, New CISA, which is the Club of University and College IT Directors. And I'm afraid I have to say that FE and skills wasn't very well represented in that set of pilot partners. And we've certainly solved that problem now. So there were 7 pieces of work done under that, and one of them was a student summer of innovation, and that went very well. We've repeated it again this year, and we've just announced we're just about to announce our 20 winners of the Student Summer of Innovation 2014, which includes some really good ideas for new online services from students themselves, one of which is around cooking and catering, which I think was the one that caught my eye when I was looking through the bid. So that'll be appearing on the website shortly. So we'd run the pilot last year. We'd got something from the Wilson Review saying don't use the old model of giving out money. So we had a choice. Did we run the 2 things in parallel, or did we completely stop the traditional Jisc call and scale up co-design so that all of our innovations go through the co-design process. And since this was produced, we've decided to scale up co-design to be our only innovation process, which means that the funding call for FE that closed in November 2013 was the last ever Jisc funding call of that kind. So we've scaled up the co-design process. We've included a much wider set of partners, including representatives of FE in the skills sector, and also the students themselves through the National Union of Students, which seem to be particularly important. We've worked very hard to get all our existing projects into the co-design methodology, which was quite hard work, and then to try and commission a new set of projects for next year. And the way we've done that is through some intelligence gathering and then working with our steering groups members. So each of these organisations were invited to nominate 2 people to come to a couple of quite intensive workshops where we aim to pick 4 big strategic challenges for our sectors, but that we're going to start tackling from next academic year, from August, September. And I'm going to go through 3 of those briefly. First, not so relevant to today's topic, research at risk, but the whole area of research data management, the fact that universities acknowledge that they're taking quite piecemeal approaches to complying with current policies. They're not joining up their thinking, and that might not be a very good sustainable or long-term economic value way to do things. So our stakeholders have asked Jisc, can you help us solve this problem about how we comply with all of these policies about keeping all of our research data and making it openly available, but doing it in a more joined up and sustainable way. Then the next 2 that I'm going to just summarise are relevant to to a festival of teaching and learning, and our stakeholders said, Jisc, we're doing lots of good work within our own institutions in learner analytics, in looking at data from a variety of systems on how students are behaving, on how students are learning. We've set up some nice predictive models so we can try and spot students at risk. Can you help us spread the good practice as widely as possible to others in the sector who are interested but haven't got as far as us? And also, can you try and set up some national scale services, for example, a national benchmarking service, if people wanted to know how their students' experience was comparing with some of their peers. So we've been asked to explore that area, and that's really to build, and there is excellent work going on in HE and in FE already, so it's to build on that, to try and disseminate that, but also to create some national scale shared services around it that people can use, particularly around benchmarking. And I think those first 2 I kind of expected to come out of our workshop process. And then the 3rd one I didn't expect to come out because it's so challenging. So and it fits into some of the things that Stephen Happle was talking about. So I'm just going to wrap up now in the next couple of minutes. But what this one is, different people have got ideas what this means, and we'll have to pick 2 or 3 specific areas to tackle under a broad heading. But the gist of it is that the current systems to support, information systems to support learners, aren't really set up for the learner's benefit. All of the data models are sort of mainframe models that have the administrator at the centre of the universe, not the student. So the individual learners and their journey and their record isn't really something that any of these systems understand. And whilst people have talked about unique learner numbers, what one would really like to have is a unique learner record that would follow them on their learning journey through school, into FE, to HE, multiple degrees. And the students are now saying, well, if we're paying £9,000 a year, why do we have to do 3 years in the same place? You know, I want to study at home for 2 years in my local university, then go to London for a year maybe. I can't afford to do it for more than 1 year. Why can't they? Well, universities are spending a lot of money on recruitment and retention, and turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So if the pressure for that is only going to come from the students themselves. But the answer must be, well, there's no reason that people can do this in other countries. They're certainly starting to do it in the United States now. So what are the kind of systems that would allow and track and model that kind of journey. And they're not the systems we have at the moment. There are some candidate systems in other countries, particularly in North America and Australia, and there may be others that we're not aware of yet, but we'll find out and get to the bottom. And we've been asked to look at this. So this is a very demanding challenge, I think. And so I'd say the first two are low risk in terms of my risk graph, but I think this one is medium risk. There's certainly some useful things we can do. Whether we can really crack this problem, well, we'll do our best, but it is a difficult one. So just to wrap up then, some particular focus on the further education sector. Jisc was quite heavily involved in the consultation around the FELTAG report, which itself made a number of recommendations, and it mentioned Jisc quite a number of times. So I've summarised the FELTAG report recommendations that relate to Jisc on the board there, including the money that last November, that final Jisc call that we're investing in 40 projects, engagement with the new Education and Training Foundation, and various other activities. And the bit that really grabbed my attention in the FELTAG report was the suggestion that between 10 and 50% of all nationally funded FE content should be delivered online. 50% of a course delivered online for all nationally funded content. That's an incredibly ambitious target, and if people want to give that a go, Jisc will be very happy to see what it can do to help there. FELTAG was a government initiative just covering the FE sector, and as Stephen Heppel, I'm glad I put this slide in actually, because Stephen Heppel did this much more than me, but this summarises what he was saying. That FELTAG approach has been taken and expanded, so 2 government departments and 3 ministers have actually agreed on something, which was to commission one group to look holistically. Again, it's very difficult. How can you have systems that join up the learner journey across schools, FE and HE, when they all live in different ministries and things like that? The Education Technology Action Group is a rare opportunity to try and flag some of these issues around the whole student journey. I'm a member of the ETAG group. Jisc's helping to run the ETAG website. There's a consultation which is all, the details are all available via the website, that ends on the 23rd of June. So I'm flagging it up. You still have a short amount of time to make your own contribution and have your say, whether that's through a short, pithy comment via Twitter or a fuller submission. You're very welcome to do that. So, to summarise, I've talked about the Wilson Review and the changes in Jisc to create one Jisc, this more cohesive organisation, which is ongoing, which is hard work, but we're busting a gut to deliver what the Wilson Report asked us to deliver. And then we've looked at the changes in the innovation function at Jisc. The move away from the traditional Jisc funding call towards a co-design process where we're working with national stakeholder groups and their representatives to try and get some consensus, but quick, rapid consensus. So not, there's different types of consensus. That the bad kind of consensus for innovation is a camel is a horse designed by a committee. That was an example of consensus that isn't actually very good. But if we can do quick, agile, practical consensus, these are the areas where we can see real value we can focus on. We've said what 3 of those big headlines are going to be for next year, and I very quickly recapped on how we're trying to influence, particularly in that last challenge about from prospect to alumnus, the whole student journey and information systems to model that. We've got a really good opportunity through the Education Technology Action Group to influence there. Okay. So please do get involved. These things haven't kicked off yet. We've chosen those big thematic headings, but the detail of what comes underneath is very much to be determined. Please get involved and shape it. Thank you.
Right, can we thank Phil?